President Joe Biden met with late Putin critic Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia, but in what is becoming an alarmingly frequent trend, called her by the wrong name, Yolanda. Take a look.
We're going to be announcing the sanctions against Putin, who is responsible for his death, tomorrow. And but one thing that was made clear to me is that Yolanda is she's going to continue the fight he had underway. So we're not letting up.
Now, meanwhile, as Americans continue to criticize President Biden for his age and mental fitness, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman said that any Democrats who criticize Biden might as well be wearing a MAGA hat because they're helping get Trump reelected. This comes as Biden's job approval rating dropped to a new low, according to a new Gallup poll. Biden's job approval has shot down to 38%, below the 50% threshold that has typically led to reelection for incumbents. So it's not looking too good for Biden. There was a tweet by the chief White House correspondent for News Today Africa in Washington, where it was just Biden walking to, his aircraft, I believe. He was just walking. And the caption was, "Biden looks especially strong today, full of vigor." And people pointed out that we're talking about the president like he's someone's 7-month-old learning how to walk. Like, oh, he's looking really strong today. He's the leader of the free world. Like, we shouldn't say he's strong just for walking around. I think the Russia sanctions plan, I will say, is ridiculous. To say that, Navalny's wife is going to, to some degree keep fighting. The fight that Navalny was involved in Russia was extremely questionable. The fact that the official U.S. agency or organization, the National Endowment for Democracy, was giving $6.8 million to Russian activists to support their activities during election years and named Navalny as one of the recipients before they adopted the rule to not publicly name them. It seems like the United States has been meddling in Russian elections in the direction of supporting Navalny, who was a part of the very right-wing nationalist part of Russian politics. People spreading the message Russia for Russia, take back Russia, saying things like we should remove any federal subsidies for the Caucasus, which were mostly Muslim low-income people, saying that they were cockroaches to be exterminated. This was a guy who attended rallies with a lot of Nazi flags and swastikas, and the fact that we've chosen to liken him to Martin Luther King Jr. in his memory is just really absurd to me.
I remember people pointing out as well that Michael McFaul, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, he was appointed in 2012 and served until 2014, rose to that position around the same time that Alexei Navalny started to become very popular and become sort of this heralded figure in the Western Hemisphere. Just an interesting coincidence, perhaps, but maybe not. Going back for a bit to this Biden issue, I think you were referring to a tweet from Simon Ateba. I hope that he was being sarcastic, just knowing Simon, but funny nonetheless. I think that this is becoming a bigger problem for Biden by the day. Obviously, the polls continue to skew in the direction of Americans believing that he is far too old and far too mentally incompetent to be president. I think it's at 86%. Last I checked, that believe he is too old to be president. Most Americans believe that he should step aside and allow another Democrat to take over. And with John Fetterman making this case that basically everyone has to shut up about Joe Biden, particularly Democrats, because if they talk about what's really happening, what's in front of their eyes, that it's helping Trump, is a really interesting tack to take here. Because I would think if you're a member of the Democratic Party right now, you probably want the person to be the nominee who is best positioned to defeat the former president. And right now, polling shows a very tight race with Trump having a slight edge and Biden with a very low approval rating and lots of concerns about his health. So the earlier that you're able to potentially convince Biden to step aside and then have some kind of brokered convention where Biden selects his successor and the Democratic Party machine gets behind them, the earlier that process really starts, I think the better chance that Democrats have to leave the Biden stain behind them and run someone who might be a more appropriate challenger to Trump. So I just don't find Fetterman's logic here to be quite in keeping with what you would say if you really do want the best chance for Democrats to win in 2024.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more with that assessment of what the Democratic Party's up to and what's, best for people who care about the left in the United States. Biden could very well secure the nomination and then endorse someone else, instead of having delegates go to the Democratic National Convention and cast their ballot for Biden. He could say, I'm endorsing someone else. I'm too old. I'm going to step aside. Like, thank you for making me the nominee. But we've decided to handpick this other candidate. Delegates who are here for me, please vote for this other candidate. This is a strategy that's been written about quite a bit. And it's a liberal fantasy so that instead of Biden stepping aside and we have the Democratic Party base pick a replacement, now you have Biden and people within the Democratic establishment and leadership picking the replacement. But it's better than Biden. I don't think by criticizing Biden, someone's supporting Donald Trump. It's ridiculous to think that in a system where we have establishment candidates handpicked all of the time, that criticizing them means you like the other guy. It's just not how it works. I think anyone who criticizes Biden they're doing it because they love the country, because they want a different future for the country. They see, the flaws in his policies. They see that he's not making good decisions, especially on the front of foreign affairs recently with the support of Israel and the Israel war on Palestine, and now with the sanctions on Russia. It's not going to hurt Putin if the United States sanctions Russia. It's going to hurt the everyday people in Russia if we do things that harms their economy, as we attempted to when we said that we are going to sanction Russia following their invasion of Ukraine. It resulted in the ruble immediately dropping in value. That doesn't hurt Putin. Putin's going to be fine. He's going to have his mansions. He's going to have his nice cars. He's going to have his food and his caterers and live a very comfortable life. It's everyday Russian people that will be harmed. This isn't a strategy that benefits the United States. So for him to not learn from that mistake and for him to decide to pursue sanctions again, I think speaks to his mental state as well. We need someone who is younger in their vision for what the United States should be in the future, but also who has the wherewithal to be present in meetings and not get people's names wrong. And so Fetterman, it's weird seeing him shill for the establishment of the Democratic Party when, he used to be kind of progressive and an independent thinker.
Yeah, he's changed on a lot of his stances apparently, and no longer even considers himself progressive. I mean, just a few weeks ago, members of the right were actually cheering him on for some of his stances, particularly on Israel. I imagine now after these Biden comments that maybe they're not so happy with him anymore. But to your point about his stances on foreign policy, Biden that is, I think it's an important point because there's not a lot of clarity on how much of foreign policy is actually currently being led by Joe Biden himself. The Spectator recently ran a piece identifying Jake Sullivan as really the architect of a lot of the Biden administration's foreign policy. Of course, we know that the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, has been in and out because he's suffering from prostate cancer and has been undergoing a lot of surgeries with resulting complications that has had him passing off duties to his undersecretary, who at one point was on vacation in Puerto Rico. And so I think there's just a lot of questions in general around the administration about who's really in charge. And I don't think anyone really believes at this point that it's Joe Biden. And so you have all of these aides and other government officials, other cabinet members who are sort of jostling and jockeying for positioning to try to be the decision maker in lieu of Biden being able to have that position for himself. So you end up with all of these really contradictory statements, contradictory policy decisions that don't make a whole lot of sense because there really isn't that singular figure who's making that final call. And obviously, when it comes to foreign policy and national security, that is a huge problem for the American people and their ability to be safe. If the U.S. foreign policy is that inconsistent, you're going to end up leading yourself into a lot of unnecessary conflict, which is exactly what we've seen with the rise in instability around the rest of the world. We're out of time. We'll be right back with more Rising after this.